a story about a ship that was found sailing across the middle of the Atlantic Ocean with nobody on board. Not a wreck, not a burned-out hull drifting on its side. A healthy ship sails up, cargo untouched, food in the pantry, clothes still folded in the sea chests, and not one living soul anywhere on her. 10 people had been aboard when she left New York. The captain, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, 7 working sailors, and somewhere out there, in a stretch of grey water between the Azores and the coast of Portugal, all 10 of them simply vanished. No bodies were ever found, no wreckage, no message, nothing. This happened in December of 1872, and I want you to understand something before we go any further. This is not a legend. Every date I'm going to give you, every name, every strange little detail, it all comes from court records, ship's logs, letters, and sworn testimony. This really happened, and more than 150 years later, nobody can tell you with certainty why. So settle in, get comfortable, let the rest of the world go quiet for a while, because we're going back to a cold afternoon in the middle of the ocean, and we're going to piece this together, you and I, one clue at a time. It begins on the 4th of December, 1872, though if you're keeping land time instead of a sea time, you'd call it the 5th. Either way, it's early afternoon. Picture the middle of the North Atlantic, roughly 400 miles east of the Azores, about halfway between those small volcanic islands and the coast of Portugal. The sea out here is never truly calm in December. Long grey swells roll under a pale sky, and the wind carries that raw, salty chill that gets into wool and never quite leaves it. A ship called the Dei Gracia is making her way east. She's a brigantine, a 2-masted sailing vessel, sturdy and glamorous, built for cargo, and she's carrying barrels of petroleum from New York to Gibraltar. Her captain is a Nova Scotian named David Morehouse, an experienced, level-headed man, and at the wheel on this particular afternoon stands a helmsman named John Johnson. Johnson is the first one to see it. About 5 miles off, there's another vessel, and something about her is wrong. He can't say exactly what, not at first. Just a feeling. The kind of instinct sailors develop after years of reading ships the way you or I might read a face. Her sails don't look right. She's moving strangely, yawing, drifting, wandering slightly off the wind as if no hand is guiding her. Johnson calls out. The second mate takes a look through the glass. Then Captain Morehouse himself comes on deck, and as the 2 ships slowly close the distance over the next couple of hours, the wrongness sharpens. Some of her sails are set. Others hang loose or are missing entirely, torn away. She's sailing, technically, but she's sailing like a sleepwalker. Morehouse signals her. It's what you do at sea. You offer help, you exchange names, you check on each other, because out here, other ships are the only neighbors you have. There's no answer. He signals again. Nothing. No flag runs up. No figure appears at her rail. No face at her wheel. Just the creak of her rigging drifting across the water, and the slap of waves against her hull. Now, here's the first detail that made the hair rise on the necks of the men aboard the Dei Gracia as they drew close enough to read the name painted on her stern. Morehouse recognized the ship. She was called the Mary Celeste, and Captain Morehouse knew her. He knew her captain. Both vessels had been loading in New York at the same time, just weeks before, at piers on the same stretch of the East River. Some accounts even say that Morehouse and the Mary Celeste's captain she sailed. Though I should be honest with you, historians have never been able to verify that dinner. It may be true. It may be a detail that attached itself to the story later. But what is certain from the records is this. The Mary Celeste had left New York on the 7th of November, a full week before the day crashed. She should have been far ahead. She should have been nearly to the Strait of Gibraltar by now. Instead, here she was, wandering, silent. Morehouse ordered a boat lowered. His first mate, a big, capable man named Oliver Defoe, climbed down into it along with second mate John Wright, and they rowed across that cold stretch of open water, the oars creaking softly in their locks, the swells lifting and dropping the little boat, the silent ship growing larger and larger ahead of them. Try to put yourself in that rowboat for a moment. The only signs are the water, the wind, and your own breathing. And ahead of you is a full-size sailing ship, 100 feet of wood and canvas and rope, that is not answering. You call out as you come alongside. Your voice sounds small out here. Nothing comes back but the hollow knock of the sea against her planks. Defoe and Wright climbed aboard, and what they find in the next hour is the heart of this entire mystery. So let's walk through it slowly, the way they did. Deck by deck, room by room, the wheel was not lashed. On a properly managed ship, if you step away from the helm even briefly, you tie the wheel down so the rudder holds its position. This wheel was free, spinning loosely back and forth with every swell, the ship steering herself badly wherever the wind pushed her. The binnacle, that's the wooden housing that holds the ship's compass, right beside the wheel, had been knocked out of place, and the compass inside it was destroyed. Broken glass. Whether it was smashed in some violent moment, or simply damaged by weeks of the ship lurching around unmanned, no one could say. 2 of the hatches leading down into the ship were open, the fore hatch and the small lazarette hatch at the stern, and their heavy wooden covers were lying on the deck beside the openings, as if someone had thrown them off in a hurry. But the main hatch, the big one in the center of the deck, was closed and properly secured. Defoe went below, and down in the hold, in the dark, he found water, about 3.5 feet of it sloshing back and forth in the bottom of the ship. Now, that sounds alarming, but Defoe was an experienced seaman, and he knew immediately that it wasn't. Wooden ships always take on some water. That's why they carry pumps. 3.5 feet in a ship this size, after weeks of storms with nobody pumping. That was nothing. The Mary Celeste was not sinking. She was nowhere near sinking. In fact, Defoe would later swear under oath that she was perfectly seaworthy, that he would have been comfortable sailing her around the world. But then he found something on the deck that stopped him. Next to one of the pumps lay a sounding rod. It's a simple tool, a weighted rod on a line that you lower into the well of the ship to measure how much water is in the hold, the way you'd check the oil in an engine. Someone had used it. Someone had drawn it up out of the well, read the depth of the water, and then dropped it on the deck instead of stowing it. Which means that one of the last things anyone did aboard the Mary Celeste was measure how much water was in the ship. Hold on to that detail. It matters. We'll come back to it. Defoe moved on into the cabins. And this is where the story stops being merely strange and becomes something that gets under your skin. The captain's cabin was at the stern. The skylight above it had been left open, and rain and spray had gotten in over the weeks, so there was dampness everywhere. Water on the floor, bedding gone clammy, that cold mineral smell of a room the sea has been breathing into. But underneath the water damage, the cabin was ordinary, undisturbed. The captain's bed was there, and beside it, a smaller impression in the bedding, the sleeping place of a small child. There were toys, a child's clothing packed neatly away. There was a sewing machine, and against one wall stood a melodeon, a small reed organ, the kind a family would gather around in the evenings to sing hymns, because this was not just a working ship. This was somebody's home. In the mate's cabin, Defoe found the ship's logbook, and in the cabin, the log slate, the piece of slate where officers chalked notes before copying them into the official log. The last entry on that slate was dated the 25th of November at 8 o'clock in the morning. It recorded the ship's position within sight of Santa Maria, the southernmost island of the Azores, about 6 miles off its northeastern point. Defoe did the math, and so can we. From that position near Santa Maria to the spot where the Dei Gratia found her is roughly 400 nautical miles, and the last log entry was 9 days old. 9 days, 400 miles. The Mary Celeste had sailed all that way, through open ocean, through changing winds, generally holding an easterly course along her intended route, apparently with no one aboard. Some historians think that alone is one of the eeriest facts in the whole case. An empty ship, more or less following her own planned voyage, like a horse walking home without its rider. Now, the galley, the kitchen, and here I have to pause, because this is where the legend and the truth split apart, and I promised you the truth. If you've ever heard of the Mary Celeste before tonight, you may have heard that the boarding party found warm meals still sitting on the table, tea still steaming, breakfast half eaten, as if the crew had vanished mid-bite. It's a chilling image. It is also completely false. That detail was invented 12 years later by a young writer named Arthur Conan Doyle. Yes, the man who would go on to create Sherlock Holmes in a sensational short story he published in 1884. He even got the ship's name wrong, calling her the Marie Celeste, and his fiction was so vivid that it fused itself onto the real event, and people have been repeating its inventions as fact ever since. What Defoe actually testified to was quieter than that, and honestly, I think it's stranger. There was no food set out at all, no meal in progress. The galley was in reasonable order, and the ship carried roughly 6 months' worth of provisions, barrels of food, plenty of fresh water. Whatever happened aboard the Mary Celeste, her people did not leave because they were starving, and they did not leave in the middle of dinner. But they did leave in a hurry, because everywhere Defoe looked, he found the things that no sailor abandons willingly. The crew's sea chests were still in the forecastle, their spare clothes inside, their oilskins, the waterproof coats a sailor needs to survive foul weather on deck, still hanging there. Defoe would famously note that the men had even left their pipes behind, and if you knew sailors in 1872, a man might forget his boots before he forgot his pipe. And yet, some things were missing. Very specific things. The ship's chronometer was gone. The sextant was gone. Those are the 2 instruments a captain uses to navigate, to find his position on the empty face of the ocean. The ship's register and papers gone, and on the deck, along one rail, were signs that a section of railing had been taken down, the kind you remove when you're launching a boat, because the ship's boat was gone. The Mary Celeste carried a single small yawl, a rowing boat, maybe 20 feet or so, meant for going ashore or moving between ships. It had been stowed across the deck, and it was not there. It hadn't been torn away by a wave. The lashings and the state of the deck suggested it had been deliberately launched. So now, sit with what Deveau was piecing together, standing on that silent deck, with the wind moving through the rigging above him. 10 people did not evaporate. 10 people got into a small boat. They took the tools of navigation with them, which means someone, almost certainly the captain, was thinking clearly enough to grab the chronometer and the sextant on the way out. They took the ship's papers, but they left their clothes, their food, their water, their pipes, a child's toys, everything. Whatever made them go over the side and into that little boat. They believed they had minutes, maybe less. And there was one more thing. Trailing from the ship, or lying frayed where it should have been secured, a stout rope. The main peak halyard, one of the strongest lines on the vessel. The rope used to hoist the big fore and aft sail, was reported broken, its end gone. Some researchers believe that rope is the single most important clue in the entire mystery, because if you were 10 people getting into a small boat beside a large ship in the open ocean, and you weren't sure whether you'd need to come back, what would you do? You'd tie yourself to the ship. You'd pay out a long line, the strongest one you could grab, and you'd stay tethered to her, floating behind her, waiting to see what happened next. And if that line broke, hold that thought. Hold it gently, because to understand what those 10 people might have been afraid of, we have to leave this cold December afternoon and go back a few weeks to New York in the autumn of 1872. We need to meet them, all of them, because this story is not about a ghost ship. It's about a family and 7 working men, and the last days of their lives that anyone can account for. The captain of the Mary Celeste was a man named Benjamin Spooner Briggs. He was 37 years old, from Massachusetts, from a town called Marion, near the old whaling coast, and the sea ran in his family like a current. His father, Captain Nathan Briggs, had commanded ships for decades. 5 of Nathan's sons went to sea, and the family had already paid the ocean's price more than once. Benjamin's brothers would be claimed by the sea, and his father, Nathan, had died just 2 years earlier, in a way that feels almost like an omen. Struck by lightning, standing in the doorway of his own home, Benjamin Briggs was, by every account that survives, a serious, decent, deeply religious man. He didn't drink. He was known as a fair captain and a skilled mariner, master of several vessels before this one. He read his Bible, and in 1872 he had just made an investment in his own future. He'd bought shares in a recently refitted brigantine, becoming part owner of the ship he was about to command. The majority owner was a New York shipping man named James Winchester. The ship, of course, was the Mary Celeste. And here I'll tell you something about the ship herself, because sailors of the time certainly whispered about it. The Mary Celeste was not born with that name. She had been built 11 years earlier, in 1861, at a little shipyard at Spencer's Island in Nova Scotia, and launched as the Amazon. And from the very beginning, things went wrong around her. Her first captain fell ill, and died only days after taking command of her maiden voyage. In her early years, she was damaged in accidents, ran into trouble more than once, and was eventually wrecked and salvaged, passing through owners' hands until she was rebuilt under the American flag and given a new name. Now, I want to be careful here, because a ship's curse is a story we tell, not a fact. Plenty of working vessels racked up accidents in those years, but it is simply true that by 1872 the ship already had a dead captain and a trail of misfortune behind her. And an old superstition says that renaming a ship is bad luck. Benjamin Briggs was not a superstitious man. He saw a sound, newly enlarged, newly refitted vessel, and a good business opportunity. And he made a decision that told you everything about how safe he believed this voyage would be. He brought his family. His wife, Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, 30 years old, a minister's daughter, warm and musical, came aboard with him. That melodeon in the cabin was hers. She played and she sang, and with them came their daughter, Sophia Matilda. Sophia was 2 years old. Their older child, a 7-year-old boy named Arthur, stayed behind in Massachusetts with his grandmother because he had school. Try, for a moment, to picture that goodbye. A mother kissing her son, telling him she'd be home in a few months, taking his baby sister's hand and walking up a gangplank in New York. Arthur Briggs would wait for the rest of his life. No one from that ship ever came home. The crew Briggs hired was small, 7 men, and carefully chosen. His first mate was Albert Richardson, a Maine man in his late 20s who had sailed with Briggs before and was married to a niece of the ship's owner. Trusted, known. The second mate was Andrew Gilling, from New York, of Danish descent. The cook and steward was a young man named Edward Head, newly married. His wife saw him off at the pier, and the 4 ordinary seamen were Germans, from the tiny Frisian Islands off the North Sea coast. Arian Martins, Gottlieb Goodshaw, and 2 brothers, Volkert and Boyer Lorenzen. Quiet, experienced men from a place where nearly every family lived by the sea. When investigators later looked into all 7 of them, their records, their reputations, letters from people who knew them, they found nothing. No histories of violence, no criminal pasts, solid, ordinary, professional sailors. And we have Sarah's own voice on this, which I find almost unbearable to read now. In her last days in New York, she wrote letters home. They survive, and in one of them, she passed along her husband's opinion of the new crew, that they seemed a peaceable, capable set of men, and that if they carried on as they'd begun, the voyage should go well. Ordinary words, hopeful words. Benjamin wrote to his own mother in the same spirit, that the ship was in beautiful trim, and he hoped for a fine passage. Those letters went ashore. And then the letters stopped forever. Now, the cargo. Pay attention to the cargo, because many historians believe it's the key that unlocks everything. At Pier 50 on the East River, over the last days of October, stevedores loaded 1,701 barrels into the Mary Celeste's hold. Inside those barrels was alcohol, not the drinking kind, but raw industrial alcohol, poisonous stuff bound for Genoa in Italy, where it would be used to fortify wines. 1,700 barrels of it packed tight in the dark below decks. It was flammable. Its fumes were flammable. Every sailor aboard knew that you did not bring an open flame near that hold, and a careful captain like Briggs would have thought about those barrels every single day of the voyage. She was ready in the first days of November. Briggs actually cast off on the 5th, but the weather in the harbor was so foul that he anchored off Staten Island and waited 2 full days for it to ease. Sarah used the pause to send one last letter ashore. And then, on the 7th of November, 1872, the Mary Celeste put to sea, 10 souls aboard, and turned east into the Atlantic. The weather that month was brutal. We know this independently from the logs of other ships crossing at the same time, including the Degracia herself, which left New York on the 15th, 8 days behind. Storm after storm rolled across the North Atlantic that November, and the Mary Celeste's own log, recovered later, remember, shows her fighting heavy weather for much of the crossing, taking the longer, safer northern approach, then working her way down toward the Azores. Nothing in that log hints at trouble beyond hard sailing. No conflict, no sickness, no fear. Day after day of positions, winds, and weather, the handwriting steady. Right up to the morning of the 25th of November, 6 miles off the island of Santa Maria. And then the record simply ends. Whatever happened, happened after 8 o'clock that morning. And by the best reconstructions, it happened soon after, likely that same day, in daylight, within sight of land. Because here's a quiet, technical detail that investigators noticed. Given the sails that were set, and the sails that were furled when she was found, and given the recorded winds, the ship's condition made the most sense if she'd been abandoned while still near Santa Maria, and had then drifted and sailed herself, unmanned, for those 9 days and 400 miles until the Degracia crossed her path. So the question sharpens to a single morning. Calm enough sea, land actually visible on the horizon, assigned ship, ample food and water, and sometime in the hours after breakfast, 10 people, including a mother carrying a 2-year-old girl, went over the side into a 20-foot boat and rowed away from safety. What on earth did they see? What did they hear, or smell, or feel under their feet that made a cautious, experienced, God-fearing captain decide that a little open boat was safer than his own ship? Before we reach for answers, the story takes a darker turn first. Because when the Mary Celeste reached the land, the first official explanation wasn't an accident at all. It was murder. Captain Morehouse made a hard decision out there on the 4th of December. Maritime law offered a powerful incentive. A crew that rescues an abandoned vessel and brings her safely to port can claim salvage. A reward, be it from the value of ship and cargo. But splitting his crew was dangerous. He had 8 men. He kept 5, and gave 3 to Oliver Defoe, who boarded the Mary Celeste, and with just 2 sailors, pumped her out, repaired what he could, and sailed that half-crippled ghost ship 600 more miles to Gibraltar. 2 ships, undermanned, crossing stormy December seas within sight of each other. Think about what those nights must have been like for Defoe and his 2 men, Augustus Anderson and Charles Lund. Their names are in the court record too. 3 sailors on a ship built to be worked by 8, standing watch and watch with almost no sleep, pumping her dry, nursing her torn sails, and living hour after hour inside the belongings of 10 missing people, cooking in a dead man's galley, staring by lamplight past a cabin where a child's toy still lay. Defoe would testify that they lost sight of the Degracia in thick weather near the end and came into the strait alone, a ghost ship sailing herself home a second time, only now with 3 exhausted, uneasy men aboard her. Sailors are a superstitious breed, and I can only imagine what passed through their minds in the small hours, when the rigging groaned overhead and the empty bunks below seemed to listen. But Defoe was not a fanciful man. His testimony is flat, precise, almost stubbornly unimaginative, and maybe that's exactly why the court and history came to trust every strange detail he reported. He wasn't telling a ghost story. He was telling an inventory, Gracia, arriving on the evening of the 12th, the Mary Celeste on the morning of the 13th. And within hours, the empty ship was seized by the British Vice Admiralty Court, and the salvage hearings began. Which brings a new character into our story. And I'll be honest with you, he's the villain of this chapter, though he'd have told you he was its hero. The Attorney General of Gibraltar, a man named Frederick Solly Flood. Proud, stubborn, suspicious to his bones. Solly Flood took one look at this case and decided that the sea does not simply swallow 10 people from a signed ship. Somebody, he concluded, had done something, and he set out to prove it. He ordered the ship surveyed inch by inch. A marine surveyor named John Austin spent hours aboard her. A diver examined her hull below the waterline, and the survey produced findings that, for a while, made the whole world lean in. On the bow, Austin found a narrow groove cut into the planking on each side. Marks he believed had been made deliberately with a sharp instrument. On the deck and on the rail there were stains that looked to suspicious eyes like blood. And in the captain's cabin, under the bed, the searchers found a sword, an old Italian blade, and on that sword more stains. You can imagine the story assembling itself in Solly Flood's mind. Mutiny. The crew breaking into the cargo, maddening themselves on the alcohol, murdering Briggs, his wife, his baby daughter, and the officers in a drunken frenzy, then fleeing in the ship's boat. He wrote to London in exactly this vein, and when that theory developed problems, because remember that alcohol was poisonous, nearly undrinkable, and the ship showed no signs of a struggle, he pivoted to an even uglier idea. Perhaps, he hinted, Morehouse and Briggs had planned the whole thing together. A conspiracy to murder the crew, stage an abandonment, and split the salvage money. He noted how conveniently the two captains had known each other in New York. The insinuation hung over the honest men of the Dei Gratia for months, and had stained their names for decades. But here's what the evidence actually did once real analysis was applied. It collapsed. Quietly, piece by piece, the stains on the deck and on the sword were tested by a physician in Gibraltar, Dr. Patron. His conclusion was clear. They were not blood, and in a detail that tells you everything about Solly Flood. That report, the one that demolished his theory, was not made public. It sat suppressed in the files, and its findings only emerged much later. The deliberate cuts on the bow were examined again by others, including an experienced American naval captain, who judged them to be nothing more than natural splitting of the wood. Seams opened by weather and strain, not by any blade, and every background check on every crew member came back spotless. There had been no mutiny, no murder anyone could demonstrate, no struggle, no blood. After 3 months, the court had no choice. In early 1873, the Mary Celeste was released to her owners, and the salvage award tells you exactly what the authorities still privately suspected. Defoe and the men of the Dei Gratia, who had risked their lives to save a $46,000 ship and cargo, were awarded £1,700, roughly a fifth of what Customs said they'd earned. It was an insult dressed as a reward. The court never accused them of anything. It just never quite stopped squinting at them, and while lawyers argued in Gibraltar, something quieter and sadder was happening across the ocean in Massachusetts. Weeks had become months. In the town of Marion, a 7-year-old boy kept going to school and coming home and asking, message in a bottle, though for years hoaxers cruelly manufactured fake ones. 10 human beings had stepped off the edge of the recorded world. So the ship was released. A new captain took her on, and she completed her interrupted errand. She carried those 1,700 barrels on to Genoa. And in Genoa, when the cargo was finally unloaded, one last clue surfaced. The most important one of all, some historians think. 9 barrels were empty, not smashed, not obviously leaking, just empty. And when researchers much later traced the cooperative records, they found something remarkable. Those 9 barrels, alone out of 1,701, had been made of red oak instead of white oak. And red oak, this is just carpentry, just chemistry, is porous. White oak holds liquid, red oak weeps. 9 barrels of raw alcohol had been slowly breathing their contents out into a sealed, unventilated hold for weeks, through storm after storm, as the cargo shifted and chafed. Now come back with me to that morning of November the 25th off Santa Maria, and let's assemble the pieces we've gathered, the way 150 years of sailors, insurers, and historians have assembled them. The ship has just come through days of heavy weather into easier seas near the islands. The hold has been sealed tight the whole way across. Down in that darkness, fumes from 9 weeping barrels have been pooling, mixing with air, waiting. Perhaps the sudden change in temperature and motion matters. Perhaps barrels grinding against each other strike a spark of static. Perhaps it's nothing more than the moment someone finally opens the hold to air it out after the storms. And then something happens. A rumble from below. Maybe a dull whump of igniting vapor. A rush of gas. The forehatch cover leaping from its seat. Remember what Defoe found. 2 hatches open, their covers off, and one modern experiment run by a chemist at University College London in 2006 showed that alcohol vapor can produce exactly this. A spectacular, booming pressure wave of cool flame that blows hatches and terrifies everyone nearby, yet burns nothing, scorches nothing, and leaves no soot behind. Ghost explosion. Violence with no fingerprints. Imagine standing on that deck with a 2-year-old below and 1,700 barrels of alcohol under your feet, and hearing that. Now, the sounding rod on the deck makes sense. Someone frantically checking whether the ship is holed, whether she's flooding. Now, the missing instruments make sense. A captain, deciding in seconds, grabs the chronometer, the sextant, the papers, the things you need to survive and to prove who you are, and nothing else. Now, the yawl makes sense, and the lowered rail, and now that broken halyard makes sense most of all. The strongest rope on the ship paid out as a tether, so they could ride behind her at a safe distance and wait. If she exploded, they were clear. If she didn't, they could haul themselves home, hand over hand. 10 people in a 20-foot boat on a long line, watching their ship, waiting for a blast that, as far as we know, never came. And then, somewhere in those hours, the weather freshened. The logs of other vessels show the wind rising in that region soon after. The Mary Celeste, sails still set, would have gathered way, faster and faster, dragging that overloaded little boat through building seas, until the line snapped. I want you to sit with that image for just a moment, because if this reconstruction is right, and I have to say clearly, it is a hypothesis, the most a certainty. Then the true horror of the Mary Celeste was not sudden at all. It was slow. It was 10 people in an open boat, 400 miles from the shipping lane's mercy, watching their home, their food, their water, their child's warm bed, sail away from them into the gray, growing smaller and smaller until the sea was empty in every direction. No trace of that yawl was ever found. The Atlantic in late November would not have been survivable in such a boat for long, whether they overturned in the rising sea, or drifted until thirst and cold took them. No one knows, and no one ever will. Some researchers still argue for other triggers. A waterspout that struck the ship and panicked them. A false conviction that she was sinking after the pumps misled them. Even the rumble of an undersea quake near the volcanic Azores. Historians genuinely disagree on the spark, but nearly all of them now agree on the shape of the ending. An orderly abandonment, a tether, a broken line, an empty sea, and the ship herself. The Mary Celeste lived on for 12 more years, and no one who owned her prospered. She changed hands again and again, 17 times by most counts, losing money, gathering her dark reputation, until in 1885, her final captain, a man named Gilman Parker, deliberately ran her onto a coral reef off Haiti, having stuffed her with near-worthless cargo insured as valuable goods. Insurance fraud, but the ship that would not sink betrayed him. She hung on the reef instead of vanishing. The fraud was exposed, and Parker was ruined, dying within months. The Mary Celeste ended her days burning and rotting on that reef, as if the sea had finally decided to keep her. Benjamin, Sarah, little Sophia, who never saw her 3rd birthday, Albert Richardson, Andrew Gilling, Edward Head, whose bride waited in New York, Arian Martins, Gottlieb Goodshaw, Volker and Boye Lorenzen, whose mother on a tiny German island lost 2 sons in one unexplained morning. Say their names softly. They were not a legend. They were 10 real people who did everything right, who were careful and sober and skilled, and who met something at sea that frightened them off their own ship, 6 miles from the land, on a November morning in 1872. The ocean took the rest of the story, and after all these years, after the courts, the theories, the chemistry, the seances and hoaxes and novels, the honest ending is the one the sea has always given us. The Mary Celeste came home. Her people never did. And on quiet nights like this one, that is still, somehow, the loudest silence in the history of the sea. Sleep well, and if you dream of grey water tonight, let it be calm.